The steering wheel crushed my chest, glass raining down like diamonds, while my husband's voicemail played on a loop. "Sign the papers, Natalie. It's over." I died coughing up blood on Highway 101, betrayed and utterly broken. But when I gasped and opened my eyes, the ink on our divorce decree wasn't even dry yet. The air in the dining room of our penthouse at the Four Seasons Residences in Seattle smelled sharply of Tom Ford oud wood and freshly brewed espresso. I blinked, my vision swimming, my chest instinctively heaving as if still fighting the crushing weight of a shattered steering column. But there was no twisted metal. There was no blood. There was only the cold, smooth expanse of the custom Italian marble table. And sitting across from me was the man who had orchestrated my absolute ruin, Dominic Walsh. He looked exactly as he had 3 years ago, before the IPO that made him a billionaire, before he drove me into the dirt, before his negligence and cruelty pushed me into a fatal car crash on a rainy Tuesday night in November. He sat back in his chair, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, his jaw set in that familiar line of arrogant impatience. "Don't make a scene, Natalie," Dominic said, his voice a low, patronizing drawl that used to make my heart flutter, but now only made my stomach churn. "My lawyers have been exceedingly generous. You keep the summer house in Carmel. You get a lump sum of $2 million. But I need you to sign today. Harrison is filing the paperwork by noon." Harrison Gable. His ruthless bulldog of an attorney, sitting silently to Dominic's right, sliding the 60-page document toward me with the tip of his silver Mont Blanc pen. My mind violently stitched 2 timelines together. In my previous life, this was the exact moment I shattered. I had cried. I had thrown my coffee cup against the wall. I had fallen to my knees, begging Dominic to tell me what I did wrong, begging him to remember our vows, the years I spent supporting him when his logistics company was nothing but a rented warehouse and a maxed-out credit card. In that life, my refusal to sign initiated a brutal 2-year legal war. Dominic and Harrison systematically drained my accounts, smeared my name in the press, and legally maneuvered his assets into offshore trusts. By the time the courts were done with me, I was evicted, humiliated, and clinically depressed, culminating in that fatal drive. But I wasn't that Natalie anymore. The universe, in some twisted, miraculous glitch, had dragged my soul backward and slammed it into my body on May 12th, 2021. The day of the divorce ultimatum. I looked down at the papers. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Dominic. "Vanessa is waiting in the G-Wagon downstairs, isn't she?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. It didn't shake. It didn't crack. It was as smooth and cold as the marble beneath my hands. Dominic's posture stiffened. A flicker of genuine shock crossed his ice-blue eyes. Harrison, the ever-composed lawyer, actually paused in the middle of closing his briefcase. "I don't know what you're talking about," Dominic lied, though a muscle in his jaw twitched. I knew exactly what I was talking about. Vanessa DuPont, the 24-year-old former model turned brand consultant he had been sleeping with for 8 months. In my past life, finding out about Vanessa was the final nail in my coffin. She had paraded around in my jewelry, driven the cars I picked out, and eventually lived in this very penthouse. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I picked up the Mont Blanc pen. The heavy, cool metal felt grounding in my grip. "Page 58, right?" I asked, flipping past the clauses that stripped me of any equity in Apex Logistics, his beloved company. I didn't even read them. I knew what they said. He was leaving me with pennies on the dollar, completely cutting me out of the empire we built together. Dominic leaned forward, suspicious. "Natalie, if this is some kind of trick..." "No trick, Dominic." I flipped to the signature page. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name. Natalie Hayes, not Walsh. I was done with his name. I pushed the heavy document back across the table. Silence descended on the room. It was thick, suffocating, and incredibly satisfying. Dominic stared at my signature as if it were a forgery. He had come prepared for a hysterical wife. He had come prepared for war. He had absolutely no idea what to do with my indifference. You're signing it," he stammered, dropping the cool billionaire facade for a fraction of a second. "I signed it," I corrected him, standing up. I smoothed the skirt of my navy Dior dress. "The lump sum can be wired to my primary Chase account. I'll have my things out of the penthouse by 5 o'clock. You and Vanessa can have the place to yourselves tonight." Harrison Gable quickly pulled the document toward him, checking the signature, making sure it was legally binding, a vulture securing its meal. He nodded sharply at Dominic. "Natalie." Dominic stood up, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He actually looked unsettled. "Why are you being like this? 2 days ago you were..." "2 days ago I was an idiot," I interrupted him, walking toward the grand foyer. I didn't look back. "Goodbye, Dominic. I wish you exactly the life you deserve." I walked into the master bedroom and locked the door behind me. Once I was alone, my knees finally buckled. I sank to the plush carpet, pressing my hands to my face. My chest heaved, but not with sorrow. A hysterical, breathless laugh escaped my lips. I was alive. I was alive, and I was free. In my past life, I fought tooth and nail for a sliver of the company equity, because I thought it was my right. I didn't realize until it was too late that fighting him in family court was playing his game, on his turf, with his bought and paid for judges. But what Dominic didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the universe hadn't just given me my life back. It had given me my memory of the next 3 years. I knew exactly how Apex Logistics was going to scale. I knew about the aggressive, borderline illegal expansion strategy Dominic was about to employ to secure his Series B funding. Most importantly, I knew about the debt. I stood up, walked to my walk-in closet, and pulled down a sleek Rimowa suitcase. I wasn't packing my designer gowns or the diamond tennis bracelets he bought me out of guilt. I packed my passport, my mother's vintage Cartier watch, and a locked, encrypted hard drive I kept hidden in the back of my shoe rack. Dominic thought he was leaving me with nothing. He thought he had outsmarted me by hiding his assets in a web of Delaware shell companies. I didn't know that my maternal grandfather, William Hayes, hadn't died bankrupt like the rest of my family believed. He didn't know about the blind trust sitting quietly in Geneva, Switzerland, and he certainly didn't know what I had done with that money 3 months ago, just before our marriage began its final, catastrophic descent. By 2:00 p.m., I was sitting in a soundproof corner booth at the St. Regis Bar, miles away from the penthouse. Across from me sat Preston Reed, a former managing director from Lazard, who now ran a highly exclusive, fiercely private wealth management firm. Preston was a man who spoke softly, wore impeccably tailored charcoal suits, and possessed the kind of financial ruthlessness I desperately needed. "You look different today, Natalie," Preston noted, sipping his sparkling water. His sharp grey eyes assessed me over the rim of his glass. "Lighter, somehow. Did you go through with it?" "I signed the papers this morning," I said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Dominic has full ownership of his equity. He thinks he's cut me out entirely. He thinks I'm a heartbroken housewife crying in a hotel room right now." Preston chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. He opened the folder, reviewing the documents I had brought him. "Men like your ex-husband suffer from a very specific terminal illness, Natalie. Hubris. They look at the board and only see their own pieces." "Let's talk about our pieces, Preston." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany table. 3 months ago, before my death, before my rebirth, I had stumbled upon a glaring vulnerability in Dominic's empire. Apex Logistics was growing too fast. To fund his aggressive expansion into the European supply chain markets, Dominic had taken out massive loans. Not standard bank loans, but predatory mezzanine debt from a consortium of private equity vultures. He had leveraged almost the entirety of his voting shares as collateral. In my past life, he had managed to secure a massive Series C funding round just in the nick of time, paying off the debt and soaring to billionaire status. In this life, I had intercepted his fate, using my grandfather's hidden trust, operating under the intentionally obscure name of the Whitman-Hayes Consortium. I had instructed Preston to quietly buy up Apex Logistics debt from those private equity firms. The firms were thrilled to offload the risk for a premium. Dominic's company owed $45 million, and he owed it directly to me. "The debt transfer is fully finalized," Preston confirmed, tapping the documents. "Apex Logistics senior secured notes are now 100% owned by the Whitman-Hayes Consortium. Your husband, ex-husband, believes his creditors are still a group of faceless suits in New York. He has no idea his ex-wife holds the leash." "And the covenants?" I asked, my heart beating with a cold, calculated rhythm. "Ironclad," Preston smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "The terms of the original loan remain intact. If Apex Logistics drops below a specific cash reserve threshold, or if capital is diverted to non-approved external ventures, it triggers an immediate default. The debt is called in immediately. If he can't pay the $45 million in cash within 30 days, the collateral is seized," I finished for him. "The voting shares." "Exactly. You wouldn't just bankrupt him, Natalie. You would legally take the entire company out from under him. You would be the majority shareholder." I sat back, staring into the amber depths of the scotch I had ordered, but hadn't touched. In my previous life, Dominic had starved me of my own money. He had frozen our joint accounts while the divorce dragged on. He had forced me to sell my car just to pay my legal fees, while he flew Vanessa to Paris on a private jet. Yet he had bled me dry until I was a hollow, desperate shell of a woman, driving tired and distracted into a rainstorm. "He's going to breach the covenant," I said quietly, absolute certainty ringing in my voice. Preston raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Dominic is arrogant, but his CFO is conservative. They know the terms of this debt. They know they have to keep their cash reserves, strictly for operational logistics." "I know he will breach it," I replied, a small, dark smile playing on my lips. "Because Vanessa DuPont is about to launch a luxury skincare line called Aura. It requires massive upfront capital for manufacturing in South Korea." Dominic is completely infatuated. He thinks he's invincible right now because he just won the divorce. In exactly 2 weeks, he is going to secretly wire $8 million from Apex's operational reserves to an LLC in Delaware to fund Vanessa's vanity project. Preston stared at me, genuinely taken aback. How could you possibly know that? The ink on your divorce is barely dry. Let's just say a little bird told me, I whispered. A little bird from a timeline where I spent hours desperately digging through public financial records, trying to find out where my husband's money was going while I couldn't afford groceries. If he diverts $8 million to a non-logistics LLC, Preston said slowly, doing the math in his head, that's a direct violation of Section 4, Clause B of the Debt Covenant. It triggers the default. Yes, it does. I finally picked up my glass and took a slow, burning sip of the scotch. Preston, I don't just want to take his company. I want to embarrass him. I want to strip him of his pride, his reputation, and his perfect new life. I want him to look at the person holding the gun to his head and realize it's the woman he thought he left completely powerless. Preston closed the folder and folded his hands over it. Consider it done, Natalie. We will monitor Apex's accounts through the auditing back channels. The moment that $8 million moves, we prepare the default notice. I left the St. Regis, feeling a kind of power I had never known. The Seattle air, usually damp and suffocating, felt crisp and electric against my skin. I checked into a private suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel under my maiden name. I turned off my phone, ordered room service, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, I slept a dreamless, unbroken sleep. The next morning, my new phone, a burner I had bought specifically for this transition, buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. Vanessa. Dominic told me you signed. Honestly, Natalie, it's for the best. You were holding him back. Please don't try to contact him. We are moving on with our lives. I stared at the glowing screen. In my past life, a text like that would have sent me into a spiral of agonizing self-doubt and tears. I would have drafted 100 angry replies, only to delete them all and cry myself to sleep. This time I laughed, a genuine, bright laugh that echoed in the luxurious suite. I typed back a single sentence. Natalie, enjoy the penthouse, Vanessa. Just don't get too comfortable. I tossed the phone onto the bed and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. Somewhere out there, Dominic was sitting in his corner office, believing he had just executed the perfect corporate and personal victory. He believed he was the master of his universe, untouchable and supreme. He didn't know that the clock was ticking. He didn't know that his ex-wife wasn't a victim anymore. She was his biggest creditor, and she was here to collect. The next 14 days were a masterclass in psychological endurance and calculated patience. I did not sit idle, and I certainly did not weep. I spent my mornings with Preston Reed, meticulously mapping out the corporate anatomy of Apex Logistics. We analyzed their supply chain routes, their vendor contracts, and the exact vulnerabilities that would bleed out the moment the debt was called in. In my previous existence, I had spent these exact 2 weeks locked in a guest bedroom, barely eating, desperately texting Dominic for an explanation he would never provide. In this life, I spent my days restructuring my grandfather's offshore trusts, ordering bespoke tailored suits, and breathing in the intoxicating, crisp air of total autonomy. I was no longer a discarded wife. I was a predator lying patiently in the tall grass. On the 15th day, at exactly 10:14 a.m., my burner phone illuminated with a secure message from Preston. It contained only 3 words. The eagle flew. A cold, magnificent shiver traced its way down my spine. I immediately dialed his private line. Preston answered on the first ring, his usually measured voice betraying a faint trace of genuine astonishment. "You were completely right, Natalie," Preston stated, the rustle of heavy financial documents echoing through the receiver. At 9 this morning, Apex Logistics Chief Financial Officer authorized an external wire transfer. $8 million was quietly moved from their primary operational reserve account to a newly formed Delaware LLC registered under the name Aura Beauty Holdings. It is a textbook, indisputable violation of Section 4, Clause B of the Senior Secured Notes. They have officially breached the covenants. The trap has snapped shut. I closed my eyes, savoring the monumental weight of his words. Dominic had done it. His sheer arrogance, fueled by his blind infatuation with Vanessa DuPont, had pushed him right off the precipice. He truly believed he was untouchable, operating under the dangerous delusion that his creditors were passive, inattentive banking algorithms rather than a woman who knew every single one of his weaknesses. "Draft the formal notice of default, Preston," I commanded, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register. "I want every legal technicality bolted down so tightly that Harrison Gable chokes when he reads it. When is the earliest we can serve them the papers?" "Legally, right this second," Preston replied. "But I assume you have a specific theater in mind for this particular execution?" "I do," I smiled, looking at the heavy gold-foiled invitation sitting on my mahogany desk. "Tonight, 8 o'clock, the Seattle Art Museum." Dominic was not a man who did things quietly. To celebrate Vanessa's new vanity project, he had rented out the entire main hall of the museum for the official launch party of Aura Beauty. He had invited the city's tech elite, wealthy venture capitalists, and the highest echelon of the Pacific Northwest's social registry. It was meant to be his grand, triumphant debut as a newly single-billionaire bachelor parading his young, beautiful muse. It was the perfect stage for his destruction. When I arrived at the museum that evening, the Seattle sky was a bruising, stormy purple. Rain lashed against the towering glass facade of the building, reflecting the flashing strobes of the paparazzi cameras gathered outside. I did not arrive in a panicked rush, and I was not wearing the modest, conservative dresses Dominic used to force me into so I wouldn't distract from his presence. I stepped out of my hired black car, wearing a backless, floor-length emerald silk gown by Alexander McQueen. My hair was swept into a sharp, elegant twist, and my grandfather's vintage Cartier watch gleamed on my left wrist like a quiet badge of royalty. The moment I walked through the grand bronze doors and handed my cashmere coat to the attendant, the atmosphere in the cavernous hall shifted. The ambient chatter of 300 wealthy guests began to falter, rippling outward from the entrance like a stone dropped in a still pond. People stared. Whispers erupted behind crystal champagne flutes. They all knew exactly who I was, and they all knew I had just been brutally divorced. I was supposed to be a ghost, a disgraced footnote in Dominic Walsh's spectacular rise to glory. Instead, I glided through the crowd with the absolute, terrifying confidence of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. I ignored the gasps and the poorly concealed pointing. My eyes cut through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns until I found my target. Dominic was standing at the center of the room, positioned beneath a massive, cascading glass chandelier. He looked nauseatingly handsome in his velvet Tom Ford dinner jacket, holding a glass of Dom Perignon. Clinging to his arm was Vanessa, wearing a sheer diamond-encrusted dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. She was laughing loudly, tossing her blonde hair, soaking in the admiration of the sycophants surrounding them. Standing just a few feet behind them, ever the vigilant shadow, was Harrison Gable. I did not hesitate. I walked directly toward the epicenter of his perfect, fabricated world, my emerald silk trailing behind me like a liquid shadow. Dominic spotted me when I was exactly 10 feet away. The smug, victorious smile on his face vanished so instantly it was as if he had been slapped by an invisible hand. His posture stiffened, his knuckles turning bone white around the stem of his champagne flute. Vanessa noticed his sudden paralysis and followed his gaze. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "What the hell is she doing here?" Vanessa hissed loudly, lacking the refined grace to keep her voice down. "Dominic, get security. Throw her out." Dominic handed his glass to a passing waiter, stepping forward to block my path. He lowered his voice to a menacing, furious whisper, completely unaware that he was staring at his executioner. "Natalie, you have lost your damn mind," he snarled, glancing nervously at the wealthy investors watching our interaction. "You signed the papers. You took the money. You do not belong here anymore. If you want to maintain a shred of your dignity, you will turn around and walk out those doors before I have you physically dragged into the street." "I think we need to have a private conversation, Dominic," I said, my tone incredibly mild, almost conversational. "You, me, Vanessa, and Harrison, right now." "I have absolutely nothing to say to you," he spat back. From the shadows just over my right shoulder, Preston Reed stepped into the harsh museum lighting. I was carrying a thick, black leather portfolio. "Mr. Walsh," Preston said calmly, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses, "I highly advise you to secure a private room, unless you want the Securities and Exchange Commission, along with everyone in this room, to witness the immediate liquidation of your assets." Harrison Gable's head snapped up at the mention of the SEC. The ruthless lawyer instantly recognized Preston. Preston Reed was a titan in the wealth management sector, a man whose presence usually meant billions of dollars were actively moving. Harrison quickly leaned in, grabbing Dominic's elbow in a vice grip. "Dominic," Harrison muttered, genuine panic bleeding into his professional demeanor. "That's Preston Reed from Lazard. Do exactly as he says. Now." Dominic, deeply unsettled by his lawyer's sudden terror, swallowed hard. He signaled to a security guard, and the four of us were quickly ushered down a marble hallway and pushed into a soundproof VIP green room. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, cutting off the thumping bass line of the party outside. "What is the meaning of this?" Dominic demanded, pacing the length of the room. Vanessa crossed her arms, glaring at me with venomous hatred. "Is this a shakedown, Natalie? Are you trying to extort me for more alimony?" I ignored him entirely. I walked over to an oversized leather armchair, sat down gracefully, and crossed my legs. I nodded to Preston. Preston opened the black leather portfolio. He pulled out a dense, brutally thick stack of legal documents, clamped together with a heavy brass binder clip. He walked over and dropped it squarely onto the glass coffee table in front of Dominic. The thud echoed loudly in the quiet room. "Dominic Walsh, as the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Logistics," Preston began, his voice devoid of any human emotion. "You are hereby served with a formal notice of default regarding your $45 million senior secured mezzanine debt. At 9 o'clock this morning, you authorized an $8 million diversion of operational funds to an external, non-logistics entity. This constitutes a catastrophic breach of Section 4, Clause B of your loan covenants." Dominic froze. The color drained from his face so rapidly, he looked like a corpse. How do you know about that? That transfer was heavily encrypted. And furthermore, my debt is held by an offshore private equity consortium. You don't represent them. Actually, Mr. Walsh, Preston corrected him smoothly, taking a step back. The private equity firms you originally borrowed from sold your debt 3 months ago. Your debt was purchased in its entirety by the Whitman-Hayes Consortium. Harrison Gable lunged for the documents on the table. He flipped frantically through the pages, his eyes scanning the aggressive legal jargon. He flipped to the very last page, staring at the ownership signatures. He began to tremble. Harrison, the man who had mercilessly drained my accounts and mocked me during mediation, looked up at me with absolute, paralyzing horror. "Dominic," Harrison choked out, dropping the papers as if they were literally on fire. The Whitman-Hayes Consortium. What about them, Harrison?" Dominic shouted, his carefully maintained billionaire facade finally shattering into pieces of sheer panic. "Who are they? Who holds my debt?" I slowly stood up from the leather armchair. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald gown, relishing every single fraction of a second in that room. I looked Dominic directly in the eyes. "I do, Dominic," I said softly, the truth ringing out like a gunshot. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. "Hayes is my mother's maiden name," I continued, pacing slowly around the glass table, watching Dominic's mind violently try to process his ruin. Whitman was my grandfather. He left behind a very quiet, very substantial blind trust. 3 months ago, while you were busy moving Vanessa into my penthouse and hiding your assets in Delaware, I used that trust to buy every single penny of your corporate debt. "No," Dominic whispered, stumbling backward until his back hit the wall. "No, that's impossible. You didn't have the money. You didn't have the leverage." "I have the debt, Dominic," I stated, my voice hardening into steel. "And because you just breached the covenant to buy Vanessa her little face cream company, the loan is immediately due. $45 million, payable in cash, by midnight tonight." Vanessa gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Dominic, what is she talking about? Are we ruined?" Dominic didn't even look at her. He looked at me, a wild, cornered animal trapped in a cage of his own making. "Natalie, please, I don't have $45 million in liquid cash. You know I don't. It's tied up in operational equity. If you call this in, if I can't pay." "If you can't pay," Harrison whispered from the floor, his career flashing before his eyes. "She executes the collateral clause. She legally seizes your voting shares, all of them." "By tomorrow morning, Dominic," I said, walking right up to him, my voice barely above a whisper, "I will be the 85% majority shareholder of Apex Logistics. I will immediately fire you as CEO. I will liquidate your office. I will dissolve Vanessa's Skincare, LLC, to recoup the stolen funds, and I will leave you exactly how you tried to leave me." "Natalie, we were married for 7 years!" he suddenly cried out, a pathetic, desperate attempt to invoke a history he had mercilessly spat on just 2 weeks ago. He actually fell to his knees, reaching for the hem of my dress. "I made some mistake. I was stupid. Don't do this to me. It's my company. I built it." "No, Dominic," I replied, stepping back so his hands grasped nothing but empty air. "We built it, and now I own it. Enjoy the rest of the party. It is the last one you will ever throw." I turned on my heel and walked out of the soundproof room, Preston Reed falling into step right behind me. We walked back through the grand hall, the flashing cameras and the whispering elite parting for me, like the Red Sea. I stepped out into the cool, rainy Seattle night, breathing in the scent of wet asphalt and complete, undisputed victory. I didn't need to look back to know that Dominic Walsh's life was over. Mine, however, had just begun. Did you love watching Natalie completely destroy her toxic ex-husband and take back her absolute power? This insane revenge story proves us that you should underestimate underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. If this dramatic rebirth story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life storytelling.